My guest today on Future Cities Africa is Juanita Clark. She is the Chief Executive Officer of the Digital Council. Juanita, welcome. For those who don't know you, can you tell us a bit more about your background, and can you then explain what the Digital Council is and what it does?
Hi, thank you. Thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me. My name is Juanita Clark, as Dan mentioned, and I'm the Chief Executive of the Digital Council Africa. It's an industry association that I founded approximately 10 years ago. Originally, we were called the FTTX Council Africa, and as an industry association, our work at the time focused mainly on the fiber optic sector. However, for the last couple of years, we felt that we had a bigger role to play. We felt that there were several conversations that we were not having in Africa and particularly in South Africa. And we felt that we needed to extend and open ourselves up and move a little bit away just from fiber to particularly focus on some other telecommunications infrastructure, such as towers and data centers, just to include some of the conversations that we really need to have, especially with the advent of 5G and how that's about to explode, particularly in South Africa.
The environment we find ourselves in at this very moment is accelerating digital transformation, as you've mentioned. But that said, many South Africans are still without access to stable internet connection. What is happening at this very moment in South Africa to solve this challenge of broadband access to everyone?
So the telecommunications sector is quite fortunate that it is deemed an essential service. So the telecom sector was never really in a lockdown as such. From a COVID-19 perspective, but you can imagine that it was also the incredible increase in demand for services has been phenomenal, especially as people started working from home and people are under more pressure to deliver exactly the same kind of service, but now work from home in an environment as if they are in the office. So recently, the government published the draft rapid deployment policy, which is a set of guidelines which will govern the manner in which telecommunications company will deploy telecommunications infrastructure, and it aims to remove some of the obstacles and the red tape. So as a sector, we're very fortunate that we could proceed as normal. In fact, if anything, government stepped up to support the sector with removing some of the red tape that it has historically been plagued with, to help them to speedily and efficiently deploy infrastructure to reach end users so that the economy could function as normal as possible and that people could continue to work.
I do think that with COVID-19, we've proven to ourselves that we can do a lot of things in a short amount of time. It doesn't have to take 50 years to get something done. The Council's charter is to educate African governments, policymakers, and political leaders on technology and data issues facing the continent. What are some of the major challenges that you are currently experiencing with getting everyone on the same page to collaborate?
I think the single biggest problem that we've got is the intergovernmental collaboration. So in order for us to deploy telecommunications infrastructure, you don't just rely on a single entity. It's not just municipalities necessarily that are involved in it. So there are several other entities that are involved in the deployment. As an example, property owners. So you will still need the approval of property owners to deploy telecommunications infrastructure. And every single one of these processes that you have to go through delays the pace at which you're deploying, because you often have to enter into negotiations, you have to, consult with the wider public, and processes and procedures are really important, and they have to be there because they also protect all our own interests. But I think the big problem that the sector has got is the inability for timelines to be set to the process. So it makes it almost impossible for you to effectively plan your projects. And the problem that the telecommunication sectors experience is not so much the processes, it's just the timelines or the lack of timelines associated with the process. So you can enter into a process to deploy infrastructure somewhere, and that process can take you anywhere from 6 weeks to 6 months to 3 to 5 years, depending on what telecoms infrastructure you're trying to get out there.
So how would you propose we fix these challenges? How do we get everyone on the same page?
So the very first step would be the adoption of something like the rapid deployment policy. We're very excited about that. It's long overdue. We've been lobbying for a really long time for this piece of legislation, and that will remove some of the obstacles. Then, of course, there's buy-in. Everybody needs to be on the same page. All the municipalities have to understand the processes and procedures, and then they have to adhere to it, because if there's no buy-in and adoption of these processes and procedures, then we will still just be exactly where we are. And then the same goes for consultation processes, your public-private consultation processes for the erection of things like towers. We'll often find that you engage in a public-private consultation with a community because you've identified a potential site where you want to erect a tower. You go through the entire process, you do all the consultations, you advertise in the newspapers, you do everything that's necessary. You get limited feedback on it, but then the day when construction starts, then suddenly people wake up and they go, oh no, you can't do this anymore. So all the time and the costs associated with site identification, the cost associated with following all the right processes and procedures are then wasted, because then very often communities will halt your deployment and the construction pertaining to your tower or your civil infrastructure, and you have to start the process all over again. So 6 to 8 months, 9 months worth of work is down the drain, and it's a very fine balance that we have to achieve. So there's a lot of rules and regulations around where you're allowed to erect a tower. For instance, you can't just erect a tower on somebody's private property. So site identification is a very important process that is followed. There's certain parameters that govern how far you need to be, and proximities from other buildings, etc. So typically we find that the people that allow a tower to be constructed will be like, for instance, a church that's got a very big parking lot. They only have people utilizing the space maybe on a Sunday, and the rest of the time they can actually derive rental revenues from renting out space where a tower can be built. But the community will still be against that, and the community will still feel that they don't want a tower to be constructed in that particular area. And then you've got to start from scratch again to identify a new area. It doesn't help and make for providing good quality connection. I always laughingly or say that everybody wants a good connection, but nobody wants the towers. And it's difficult, because you've got to, how do you overcome this? Some people have a right to have good, stable connectivity, but in order to deliver on that right, you have to find some agreement with the community where the towers will be placed and how it will be constructed, and to facilitate connectivity. It's a difficult balance. It's a very difficult balance, but yeah, I think there's about 20 to 30% of the times that tower companies completely walk away from a community because they just cannot come to an agreement. And those communities then typically would be left behind in the race to getting updated connectivity to their communities.
So if you had a magic wand and you could change one piece of legislation that's currently inhibiting progress, what would that legislation be?
So I think we would allocate spectrum as quickly as possible, so that mobile network operators can deploy at the pace and typically at the cost that they would like to. So that's also something that's very overdue. I think I would bring in some form of legislation around how we narrow the digital divide. That's a really big concern, is the digital divide and the growing digital divide. I would institute digital learning from a really early age for school children. That is something that we feel strongly about. There's, with lockdown coming into effect, there was approximately 6.4 million children that were left without access to any learning. And it's difficult for us to understand that, but a child in a rural community that cannot go to school suddenly is left further behind. And it's just this vicious cycle of those that can excel, and it's never been more evident than in COVID. So I would definitely put legislation in place that would help deploy telecommunications infrastructure to lower income areas and underserved areas. And all of this will hang off the rapid deployment policy, which is a critical piece of legislation that can help us achieve all these ambitious goals. But it is incredibly important that we start connecting underserved communities, that we revisit our learning platforms to make sure that we prepare the next generation for the digital era that we are entering, and that we make them a part of that, and that they can participate in the digital economy as we go forward. I think what's most critical for us as a society would be to take a relook at how we consider the digital economy. I think we need to make it easier for telecommunications companies to operate. I think that will facilitate investment in telecommunications company. I think if I was the president for a day, I would tear up the curriculums that we had, and I would revisit every bit of learning that our children are exposed to, because I don't think it's modern day education that we are giving them. We need to teach our children strongly how to code. They need to understand how to utilize the internet, the power of the internet. We need to show them what they can do, how they can participate in the digital economy. I think that's the most critical component of what we as a society can do for other people.
Would you homeschool your children?
I personally would find it difficult to homeschool. But I think that there are systems and there are curriculums and there are incredibly good platforms in place that can facilitate homeschooling. The foundation of any good homeschooling, though, is going to be your connectivity. You have to have a stable, reliable connectivity. The one thing that I am considering, I've got a daughter in matric, is for her to study from home next year, to not have to go to campus. I think there's a tremendous cost saving in place with that. And I think that, it depends on the child. Some children enjoy that. My child prefers to work at her own pace. She enjoys her own pace, and she enjoys learning and skipping through some of the stuff and focusing more in depth on other things. So it's a great opportunity to be able to give her that. And in fact, pre-COVID, it was already a decision that we had made that she would probably study from home a course. The benefit of that, Dan, is that she can now study at any university in the world. She's not confined just to South African universities. Not that South African universities, we've got some of the best universities in the world. We know that. But if there's a particular course or a subject matter that she wants to explore that's available on an online international platform, she can explore that. I don't have to send her to New York University, pay the flights, pay the accommodation for her to physically be there. She can now do all of those things from home. And this also narrows the opportunity for other students to learn from home. I don't know if you remember a couple of years ago, we had the Fees Must Fall movement, which raised a lot of awareness for students that simply couldn't afford to pay the fees. And at the time, I remember I was at a conference in East London, and the morning I drove my little rental car from the airport to the conference, and the radio was on, and Fort Hare University had announced that they had received 100,000 applications for children to come to university. Now, the practical things that we have to ask ourselves is that where physically do we put the children? So let's assume that fees fall, and let's assume that we can make education freely available. Where are we physically going to put the students? So the only answer that we can come up with is that we need to enable them to work and study from home. And that's the only sustainable solution that we have. It also removes the other costs associated with travel, accommodation, having to sustain themselves and buying food and groceries on the campus. Because if they're at home, that they can leverage, the home life, which can help them provide for that. And they can focus on their studies. So I think, that is a critical component. And I think that schooling and future studies from a digital platform makes a lot of sense for a lot of people, especially in the COVID environment and the COVID economy that we're facing.
I have a 2-month-old. You have an 18-year-old. I keep thinking, what will the world look like in, say, 20 years' time? What's your vision for future cities? What would be the new jobs? How will people, you can mention, how will they be educated? What will our cities look like? What kind of technologies do you see popping up?
The one thing I can promise you is that whatever your son is going to be, we don't know that yet. That job has not been defined and it doesn't have a job prescription yet. In fact, there's some statistics that says that 50% of job descriptions today did not exist 5 to 10 years ago. So it's a tough call. I would for sure focus on giving my child digital capabilities and digital skills. Although I don't think that, that in itself is the career, I think if you know how to use technology, technology will play the foundation of almost every sector that we're in. If you look at the agriculture sector, the amount of technology that's, gaining momentum through drone and hydroponics and some of the newer technologies, I think there isn't a sector, that we can remove technology from. It plays an overarching role, and it's important to give our children the necessary skills for them to adapt and to use and utilize technology in whatever it is that they're going to be doing. If you want to be a doctor, look at robotics and how robotics are changing the way that surgeries are performed, etc. How diagnoses are being made. So there's a tremendous role that technology will play going forward. I think from a city's point of view, I think we're going to start entering what is called the low-touch economy or the low-touch environment, where we won't be touching as many things. We'll see a lot of more technologies coming into play where doors will automatically open, facial recognition, which will allow you access to your offices, real low-touch environments, which will recognize you and who you are, identify you. These are some of the things that I think that we will see coming in. So the low-touch economy is definitely something that I think there needs to be a bigger focus on going forward. At least if we want to keep pace with global trends, that's certainly where it's going. And then, of course, any smart city and any future city, the foundation of a future city is still built on the technology and the communications networks. So if we haven't got adequate communications networks in the ground and if our telecommunications infrastructure is not adequate, we won't be moving. But I want to talk, to things like some of the IoT applications, like, automatic water readings and, automated traffic systems and things like that. But one almost feels that that's like last year technology. There's, with, I think, COVID-19, the single biggest thing that municipalities and local authorities can do for themselves is to get good, reliable, stable internet connectivity into their jurisdictions as fast as possible. The one thing that COVID-19 has done for all of us is given us the ability to work from home. There are several global companies that have said that their people will never return to the office. So they will keep working from home forever. So what does that mean for you and me? For you and me, it means that we can move to a smaller town where we can buy a better house, where we can have better quality of life. We can walk next to the stream in the afternoon, So it allows us this ability to go and live anywhere in our childhood neighborhoods or move back to smaller communities. And for the smaller communities and, for the municipalities, that means that they can rejuvenate their towns, that they can earn additional income, that, there'll be more rate and taxpayers coming to live back there. But there's this single thing that's going to define whether you can do that or not. And if you have to work from home, you are going to need a good, stable internet connection. And that's what's going to matter. So the advice that I would today give to municipalities and local authorities out there is to say, make yourself attractive, invite operators, make it easy, remove the red tape, make it easy for them to deploy infrastructure. Not at all cost. Obviously, we have to have standards in place, but adopt standards, make sure they deliver the connectivity at a particular standard, and then invite people. Make sure that everybody knows that you are one of the smaller towns or cities that are gearing up so that you can have an influx of people exiting the major metros. And I think it's important for the major metros as well. Dan, urbanization places tremendous pressure on the large metros as people come in to, look for work in the cities. If we can facilitate a work from home culture and people can start exiting the major metros, I think it's a win-win for everybody, for the work from home community, for people wishing to work from home, and of course for the municipalities in smaller jurisdictions.
What advice do you have for women in business, especially in these tough times for many?
I think you need to forget that you're a woman, and I think you just need to work. I think hard work ultimately pays off. I think it's an incredibly important conversation that must be had, but I think that at the end of the day, I think it's Eleanor Roosevelt that said that people will treat you the way that you give them permission to. I've never apologized. I've never seen myself as a woman. I've always seen myself as an equal. I own my place at the table. I make sure that I do my homework. When I talk sense, and that I've got valid inputs. I believe that the inputs that I have is valid and that it's got a place. And just own your chair, own your place at the table, and take it up and believe in what you've got to say and what you've got to bring to the table.